Alright, welcome. In this video I want to start doing a little bit of a refactor. As you can see here in my scene manager, where I'm going to be taking care of operations of loading in different scenes, specifically for my Super Mario zone, that means loading in different levels. The only levels that I've actually created so far are level 1 and the bonus level for level 1. And each one of these is actually a pretty big method that really just has data in it. It's just loading in a bunch of objects into the game engine. And really, loading bonus level 1 looks very similar to load level 1. It's just a lot of data. Now, we could leave it in this format and then just add load level 2, load level 3, and so on. There's dozens of levels I would have to do. But that's going to clog up my scene manager in terms of its organization, and a lot of the method or a lot of the operations I'll be carrying out inside those methods are going to be similar. The only things that are going to be different are the data, that is where I'm placing the different entities in the level. And so what I'm determined to do here in this video is refactor my scene manager so that I only have one method called load level instead, that will take an argument, which is the level, and what that is in a second. I'll have to determine what that is, but some object that is the level, and then the load level method will just load it in. So to get started, I might just cut and paste these two entries in here. This will delete everything out, and this will set my camera to be at the beginning of the level, assuming that's what we want. But then I don't want to have a bunch of, let background, and so on as continues. Instead, what I'm probably going to want is a loop of some kind. Something like this, where we're going to loop through everything in the level, and I'm being a bit vague here. I'm saying level.length. Level itself is probably not going to be a list. It could be. It's probably going to be an object instead. So I'm probably going to have to change that after I decide what level is going to be. But the idea is I want to go through this level object one at a time, and then each one of those things I will be able to pull out some information about maybe its XY coordinate, and that's all I'm going to need, at least if I'm going to load a big hill, and I'll just write a little line in here that will load a big hill. And maybe I'll do this for all the big hills, and then I'll do this for all the bushes, and so on, and that's going to be my goal. So then the next question is, well, where am I going to get this level object from? And that's the second part of the refactoring that I'm going to want to do, is I'm going to want to create a level object that's just going to have all the relevant data in there. Not everything that I've got here, not all the method calls and so on, but just the data that I need to construct the method call later on. So to build these levels, what I've actually done is I'm going to make a copy. I've made a copy of the scene manager.js. I've called it levels.js for now. And I'm going to create a variable in here called level1 that's going to have inside of it all the data that I want for level 1. Now that data is already down below here, so that's the reason why I've copied scene manager over here, is because I want that data easily available. It's right here. And then I'm going to go back to my scene manager, and that scene manager, so maybe I could show you how I might use this. Instead, I might call load level. Now this information used to tell me where I want to load Mario. I have to remember that. I need to decide where I'm going to load Mario, but I'm going to call load level, and I'm going to call this, at least for the moment, on level 1, which is what I called my object out here. Of course, I haven't finished filling that in yet. I'm going to have to do that. And then I'll have to come back and make sure that this code I write here will load it in. Let's get started by trying to load in just our big hills. So to do that, I'm just going to start by grabbing each one of these lines that has big hill on it. And I'm going to stick it up here. This is not good coding, of course. This is not writing well-formed JavaScript code. But I just want to grab the data. It's the data that I want out of these lines. Now, big hill is going to be a list of big hills. And each big hill is going to have the information inside it that is going to be relevant to build the big hill up again later. Now, we might think, for instance, we want this reference to the game engine, but the reference to the game engine will be the same for every big hill, so we don't need that. We probably do want these XY coordinates. Now, we might also want to put in this times params.blockwidth, but again, that times params.blockwidth is going to be true for every big hill. So I don't need to include that part. The only part I need to know to identify this big hill is the 0 and the 11.5. And in fact, it's not clear from this method call, but that's the x and the y coordinate. So I could just go x 0, y 11.5, and close this off. And now this object that I've just created inside this list is a good representation of this first hill. So I'm good. So now I want to do the other hills. So I'm going to just cut this or copy this, paste it. I have 3 more hills to do. I'll close off the list here, and I'll just update this data. And now I have all my big hills. Now I'm going to call this big hills actually. That makes a little bit more sense. And now I can go ahead and do this for the other entities, the other background entities that I have as well. All right, I've added the hills in here now as well, and we can actually see that the hills have the same structure that we have for the big hill, which is all I need is the x and the y coordinate. Now, I realize here that some of you might not be super familiar with JavaScript object notation, and so maybe I'll just be a bit explicit with this to start out. So say we just wanted a point like I've been doing up here above. If I want to describe that in JavaScript, I can just do something like this, x equals 10 and y equals 20, and this will create an object for me that has the x field and the y field, so that I can now go point.x or point.y. Now that's all I'm doing up here inside the big hills. I am creating a point on the fly, a object on the fly that just has an x and a y coordinate, and then I've actually created 4 of those on the fly, and I've put them inside of an array or a list. This would be a JavaScript list. And then that whole thing is put inside another object. So I've nested object. If my level 1 object on the outside has inside of it a big hills object, you could call it an object or an array, a list, and inside of it, it has 4 point objects that I haven't given names to, but are just defined on the fly. So what I'm doing here in defining it in this format, this notation, is called JavaScript object notation, which is also known as JSON. And you may have heard of JSON before. You may have seen it before. You may have seen it even not in JavaScript. It's used in other languages as well, because it's just a very simple, compact notation for an object. It will store an object for you in this simple, compact notation. Now, the other thing I should be clear about is that technically this isn't storing an object, it's only storing the data, the fields of the object. We sometimes call those structures. That's an object with no methods, no behavior attached to it. In some ways we might think of that as an impoverished object. But we use this notation to take an object that has data and the behaviors, and strip out just the data and store the data inside of a simple structure or block. Why do we want to do that? Well, we normally want to do this for exactly the reason we're doing here, to compactly store that data in some easy to read way or easy to write way for later, or to store it maybe in some kind of long-term storage like a database. And there are some good databases out there that you can just take this JSON object exactly as it is and stuff it right in the database. The one that comes to mind, the one that I use, is MongoDB or Mongoose, and that is going to be it's a popular database that uses JavaScript object notation for the records that you store right inside that database. Now I'm using that JavaScript object notation here to build up my level 1, but in case you weren't familiar with that, that's the notation or the technique that I'm doing here. So you'll notice I added a comma at the end of this list. That's what tells you in JavaScript object notation that now we're going on to the next entry in this object, the next one I'm calling hills. So I'm going to just again do the work here to go ahead now, and I guess I'm going to do my bushes next. What we'll notice for the bushes and the clouds actually is that I've got a sort of extra little piece of information that's necessary, which is how large that cloud is. In fact, in the Super Mario world, there are 3 different kinds of clouds and 3 different kinds of bushes. where the difference is just how long it is, how many times we repeat the middle segment of that bush or the cloud. And so that's all this extra information is, but it is necessary for me to reconstruct the bush. So that means for all my bushes here, I'm going to have 3 entries in there, each of their objects, instead of 2. All right, clouds are just like the bushes, and so they also have 3 entries. I've gone ahead and entered in all my clouds. I missed one bush, so hopefully I got that right. Of course, you could have a little bit of errors when you're manipulating your data or refactoring like this. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go over to my scene manager, and I'm going to try and finish off this loop here. All right, so I've updated these loops. I've added 4 loops in place of the 1 temporary loop I had there before, where I've got 1 for my list of big hills, 1 for my list of hills, 1 for my list of bushes, and 1 for my list of clouds. In which case, in each one, I will grab out that next entry in that list, and I will just create the appropriate entity with the arguments that are needed. Specifically, each one of these had an X and a Y, but we also need their size. Now, I did forget one argument here, that each of these is supposed to take the game engine as its first argument, and I don't want to miss out on that, so I'll just cut and paste that into each of my entries here. All right, before I move on and do this for my remaining entities, I do want to just kind of test and make sure that my refactor is going as planned. So I've just done a quick save, and I'm going to go do a reload and make sure that this will load the right entities into my game. So after reloading my Super Marriott Brothers, this is what I ended up with, which unfortunately does not look like what I wanted. I wasn't expecting Mario or the bricks or the Goombas or any of those to show up because I haven't loaded them in yet, but I got this. Well, this is not what I wanted. Now, many of you might already know or anticipate what I've done wrong here. Let's go back and fix the code. The error I forgot is that the XY coordinates that I was putting in here into my data were actually XY coordinates in terms of blocks, not in terms of bits. And so I've forgotten that I need to multiply these by the block width. All right, this looks a little bit better. After multiplying them by their block width, they seem to be in the right location. All right, now I've gone and added in all my bricks as well as the ground, and I've added 2 more loops to load in the brick and the ground. At least it looks like from the mini map that, yeah, so far so good. We've got some bricks and some ground in there. All right, I finished by adding in my Goombas and my Koopas, and so now my levels.js and my level 1 object are completed with just the JSON notation with all the data stored inside. Then going over to my scene manager, my new load level method, which will load a current level as long as I give you an object with the level data in it, and will load Mario into this XY location. And so here I've got this method working, and I am calling it in my initial constructor here, so let's see if it's working. So we do a reload here, and it looks like all of our entities are here according to the minimap. So it looks like everything is good after that refactor, and now we're able to better load future levels in. I'm not quite ready to delete out my load level 1 because I have not completed loading in my bonus levels yet. I haven't copied that one in yet into its own object as well. But once I'm done that, I could delete out these old methods and rely only on my load level method that I've just written here. So I hope this helps you refactor your own code so that you can load in as many levels as you need and store those levels in nice, efficient JSON objects. All right, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.